Okay. Briefly, my previous life was spent about 25 years or so in academic neurosurgery. My father was an academic neurosurgeon, so I kind of grew up in that environment, and spent time at Duke, and then spent most of my career was spent up at Harvard Medical School. And I thought I had a pretty good idea how the brain and the mind and consciousness and all that kind of thing worked. And I have kind of an extended story that I tell here at the Lifelines meetings, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed that and thoroughly enjoyed the feedback I get from the people there. And I certainly won't go into all that detail tonight, but it's kind of an amazing journey, because if you'd asked me before my coma, which is a little over 3 years ago, how much does somebody remember if they are deathly ill from bacterial meningitis and in coma for a week on a ventilator, I would say they don't remember a thing. And I would have been totally wrong, because in fact in my coma, which came on out of the blue early on a Monday morning, I was so sick that I actually had my entire life deleted. Everything was gone, language was gone. And then deep in the midst of that, I had this very rich spiritual experience, totally out of this universe. And it all happened at a time when my brain was down in the sub-basement with basically no kind of meaningful ability to function, although I do remember what I call an earthworm eye view from that era. But then it turns out that that's where this rich, incredible experience, basically on a butterfly wing in a beautiful valley with these souls dancing and this lovely girl beside me on the butterfly wing, and then going out of this universe with this divine, infinitely loving deity and an orb of light, and back and forth and back and forth, and then came back, and as I was emerging from coma, had 6 faces appear before me, one of whom I found out in the next few hours as I woke up was not physically there. It was a friend of my wife's who had done some healing work in coma patients. And when my wife said, well, Susan was the only one who wasn't physically here, of the names that I gave her, of people that I remembered from inside coma. And of course I knew, so what? She was there. You don't get there through the physical realm anyway, so it made perfect sense to me that she was there. But that totally bucked the system I had grown up in, the system that says if you understand physics and chemistry and biology and anatomy and neuroanatomy, then you get it about consciousness. And I can tell you now that that's absolutely not the case. And in fact, I've had to learn a whole lot more about consciousness since my coming back from my coma than I ever had to know as a kind of a streetwise practicing academic neurosurgeon, where you really don't have to know a whole lot, and our knowledge there is very simplistic. It's kind of kindergarten level. And I think here we're looking at consciousness kind of more at the high school level. So it's far, far beyond what is kind of the typical neuroscientific mindset these days. And in fact, I'm trying to get that word out to to my medical colleagues in a big way. Obviously, I consider Robert Monroe to be, I think he will go down in history as one of the absolute great thought leaders of all time, because of what he is enabling even as we go forward. And I certainly love this quote: the greatest illusion is that mankind has limitations. And that's just an absolutely beautiful, that kind of says it all. And I think everybody here would agree that the Monroe Institute is probably right at the fulcrum of what is coming on us, which I think is this global awakening that's going to be the biggest change ever in all of history. And we can thank Robert Monroe for his role in making that happen. I just want to say a few other things before I get into this, because I'm going to go into kind of the research in a general, very broad view, and again, more to start discussions than anything else. But when I first came out of my coma, for one thing, I spent the next 24 to 48 hours having this psychotic nightmare where I was completely out of my gourd. And of course, initially, when I would talk to my doctors and tell them what I remembered from inside coma, about this beautiful unconditional love and this deity and the hyper-reality and how all of my visual and auditory was completely intermixed. It was very strange and much more real than real. And that part, of course, was so hard to put into any kind of language that people could understand. I had not read much about the near-death literature, so I didn't know what had happened, but I assumed, especially as I would tell my doctors about this, and they would say, oh, yes, well, you were very, very sick, and your brain was soaking in pus, and I can't even believe you've come back. I mean, really, it was a very unusual illness. It was spontaneous E. coli meningitis, which is about 1 in 10 million incidents, so a really rare thing to start with. And then the fact that I went into coma over about 4 hours one morning and then was hit the ER in coma and in grand mal seizure basically gives you about a 10% survival rate at the get-go. But then as the days went on and I was not responding to antibiotics, of course that got a whole lot worse, and the numbers were probably down to about 2 or 3% survival with no chance of a meaningful recovery. And they were telling my family that I would wind up in chronic care in a nursing home, and that was kind of the best case scenario. And then it was on the 7th day when, you know, to the surprise of all of them, I started kind of fighting the ventilator and coming back, but kind of a wild man. I mean, my 10-year-old son was there to witness all that, and he just heard these conversations about stopping the antibiotics, and all of a sudden his dad's coming back, and I think he was very excited about that until he saw what his dad was now turned into, because I was really quite impaired by this meningitis, and I was very wildly paranoid, had an ICU psychosis, and that lasted for the better part of 24 hours, just out of my mind. And of course, initially, when I would talk to my doctors and tell them that, about this incredible experience I had, and that it had happened when my entire previous life had been deleted. In fact, all my language, everything was deleted. All knowledge of humans on Earth was gone. But in that setting, I had this incredibly rich experience deep in coma when my brain should not have been able to furnish that at all. And that's another point, is that the meningitis was actually very, very useful, because anything else that would have driven me into coma would really not have made as clear-cut a case about having rich experience deep inside, because there's really, meningitis is very good at wiping out the neocortex, the whole outer surface of the brain. That's the part that makes us human. Everything deep to that is kind of primitive structure. So everything about your conscious awareness sitting in this room has to do with that neocortex and what it's doing to put together the whole picture, everything about our language and kind of interpreting our body, kind of awareness, position, all the visual and auditory, all those things are put together in the cortex. And so when you wipe out the cortex, and having a 7-day bacterial meningitis where my CSF glucose, which is normally 60 to 80, and in a bad case of meningitis might go down to 20, and mine went down to 1. And it was just, there were just a whole host of features to kind of show me that this was, you couldn't just dismiss it and say, well, that's what happens when the brain is soaking in pus. You know, that just didn't work. And the doctors would say, well, anything can happen. But I can tell you that cannot happen. And that's why, as I started to figure that out, it was a real mind blower. And of course, then I started reading the near-death literature. I'll say my oldest son, Eben IV, was majoring in neuroscience. I'm very grateful to him, because when he first came home, he had come home during 4 days when I was in coma. And then he had gone back to school when my white count started to come around because he had put off a whole bunch of exams. So he went back to take the exams, and then he got a surprise call 3 days later that I was actually starting to wake up. So he finished all his exams, and then he came home early for Thanksgiving. He was majoring in neuroscience at the time, and he could tell I was still a little fragile. I was home, I had a PICC line in, was still getting antibiotics, and I was kind of lit. You know, I would get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and was so energized, so happy to be alive. I mean, light a fire and sit there and write everything I could remember. But he told me very early on there, because I was serious about writing it up, and by that time I'd kind of given up on, you know, how incredible this was, and it was so real. I'd kind of downshifted to the point, because my doctors had told me, yeah, anything can happen, where I was going to write it up as a neuroscientific report. But then I started reading all the near-death literature and realized millions of people had been to the same place. And in fact, it goes beyond that. I mean, mystical experiences going back thousands of years, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, all involve the same place. And to me, the similarities far outweigh the differences, especially when you look at kind of the different mechanisms that get people in there, whether they're through a medical kind of NDE or you know, centering prayer, or what I call the gift of desperation, which I saw very frequently in patients and families, and I'm sure many of you, especially in counseling, have seen that many a time, where people are just at the very end. And yet we all have glimpses into the same area. And of course, the great news about Bob Monroe and the Monroe Institute is with HemiSync and with the programs here, we can get into very wonderful places that have everything to do with that whole spiritual realm. And to kind of bring it all together, it became very clear to me after I realized what had really happened, and then realizing that it's very common. It became obvious that our souls are eternal, and that this spark, kind of the divine spark that we see in each other and we're aware of in ourselves, is the part that's there forever and ever. And I think one could get into some interesting discussions, like we did over dinner, about where are those boundaries of kind of the individual soul, because I think all of that's illusory, and that deep down the only thing that really exists is consciousness, and deep down it's one consciousness, and that all the rest of this emerges out of that, the apparent individuality and then the apparent physical realm. But that's something that our research will have to show over time, and we can certainly talk about you know, the different ways to get there. I guess I'll shift gears a little bit now and just talk a little bit. Obviously, so much of what Bob Monroe started here and focused on had to do with his kind of chasing the audio and binaural beats and HemiSync and hemispheric synchronization. I was attracted to the Monroe. I read Michael Talbot's book, Holographic Universe, published in 1991, and he spoke very glowingly about the Monroe Institute towards the end of that, and it's a book that I highly recommend for any of you who haven't read it, because it's very insightful about the nature of reality. Because I think what this all really involves is an absolute and complete rewrite of kind of the conventional view of what is reality. My interest, as I was saying, had everything to do with, okay, so meningitis, a rip-roaring case of meningitis, tried very hard to kill me and kill my brain, and in fact went a long way towards killing my brain. I mean, my doctors will tell you that they have no clue how come I recovered, and I don't either. I don't know how that happened. Obviously, I have a lot of gratitude. I can tell you, having been deep in there, that as most people will tell you who've had a kind of a deep NDE, is you don't necessarily want to come back. The thing is, I don't remember actually making a choice I remember being told I would be coming back. And I was told that several times. Every time I went back out of the earthworm eye view into this beautiful valley on the butterfly wing with this beautiful girl, and then outside of the universe, and taught all these lessons about physical reality and love and evil and all these things and why they are, I was told, you're going back. And since I didn't remember anything about my life, I started to assume that back meant that kind of murky, dirty jello underground with the roots above, kind of back. And I didn't realize there was another world I'd be going back to. But my thinking was, you know, well into my recovery, months later, after I'd read all about NDEs, and was that it was shocking to me because it completely rocked against everything that we think about in neuroscience, that as you dumb down the brain with pus and try to kill it off, that you reach a point where all of a sudden the blinders come off and you have this beautiful, crisp reality that's far beyond anything we experience here. And what I will tell you now is it's become very clear to me that we are conscious in spite of our brain, and that our brain actually functions more as a reducing valve. And of course, this idea is actually quite old. It's been around for well over a century. And we kind of lost track of it there with all these kind of, you know, victories of reductive materialist science all through the 20th century. We kind of lost track of that. But we also lost track of the fact that consciousness and the soul and the spirit, I mean, there was very good work being done at the end of the 19th century. Frederick Meyer certainly comes to mind, and William James. They were well on the track of realizing that there were some really profound features of the human psyche that went way beyond their ability to describe. And in fact, Frederick Meyer wrote this beautiful book published in 1903 of evidence of the survival of the human personality after bodily death. And he had more than 1,000 cases, and it was very well studied. And the problem is that's right around the time that Albert Einstein wrote 3 papers in 1905 that kind of started things going down the pathway of all the scientific revolution that we saw in the 20th century. But luckily, they kind of came with a yin-yang matching pair, with quantum mechanics being thrown in there as the little joker. That, of course, was the big clue that something much more mysterious was going on, because that suggested that consciousness was a far more profound mystery than the reductive materialist scientists wanted to admit. And of course, especially when you look at the mid-50s, when you had functionalists and behaviorists and I mean, a lot of kind of psychology, psychiatry, trying to go in a direction that basically completely denied that consciousness was anything, didn't exist. Given that they couldn't understand it at all, that was convenient. And they fooled a lot of people for a long time, but I think we're finally getting to a point where that is up. Now, the reason I bring all that up is because I was shocked that as my brain was dumbed down with this overwhelming infection, and I was close to death, that somewhere this beautiful, rich experience emerged. And in fact, when I sat down to write it down, and my son had warned me when he came home that day, don't read anything about NDEs and don't talk to anybody who was there. Just write it down. So for 6 weeks, I wrote. And I wrote down 20,000 plus words about what I remembered from within coma. And I would have told you before that people don't remember a thing. So I was obviously surprised. And then as I came to realize how sick I was with the meningitis, it became quite obvious that there was nowhere for that experience to happen. And it was also very obvious from the way the experience happened that it occurred deep in the middle of the coma. It didn't occur at the edges. There was no other explanation for where it came from. And I told you about the crazy psychotic nightmare that originally I bundled in with these beautiful, hyper-real spiritual experiences deep inside coma, thinking anything can happen. But then I realized that there were very big differences between them. And yeah, I'd had a crazy psychotic nightmare, but that was totally different from what had happened in coma. The very real and most memorable part of the whole thing, I can still remember it as if it happened yesterday. And I can tell you that psychotic nightmare has kind of drifted off as memories do. Memories from that other realm do not go away so readily. And so anyway, I was interested. Could HemiSync duplicate that? If I synchronize my hemispheres, could I in some way duplicate what had happened when they were synchronized by meningitis, but synchronized to a frequency of close to 0? And what I think is the answer is, I think yes, that things do happen, but it's probably more complex than that. No question, I learned early on with the HemiSync to turn off that little voice of reason, the little voice inside our head, which neuroscience had shown 30 years ago was a spectator. It's not the decision maker. It's tied to the ego, and it finds out about 200 milliseconds later what the decision was, deep inside, and thinks that it made the decision, but it didn't. And so early on, I used HemiSync to, like an impish teenager, put that in timeout, get that little linguistic voice and ego out of here, because the ego is certainly not your friend trying to get down to these kind of answers. And again, we can certainly talk about that in the discussion about what's really going on there. But I think there's something about, and this is why I started to become amused after a while when I would keep getting calls and emails from neuroscientists and neuropharmacologists telling me, well, do you think that maybe this and that and the other in this nucleus did this? But I went through 9 different hypotheses, neuroscientific hypotheses about why my experience could happen, and none of them worked. So I basically came out quite sure that it did not happen in my brain. And of course, the people in this room, it's like, yeah, took you that long? But I can tell you from my upbringing and being in the kind of hardcore world of neuroscience, that was a hard pill to swallow, because basically you're saying that we actually have a much richer consciousness when our consciousness is freed from the physical limitations of the brain and the human mind. And we all know that because we all work with guides and we've all been there. But I can tell you, it was a tough one for me to admit to. And I think that, a lot is still to be done. No question, HemiSync works extremely well. And I think from what I've heard about Sam to date, I think Sam is going to be a wonderful addition. And I think they're both probably going to end up playing their roles, and possibly mixing them in the appropriate fashion is going to be the best way to do certain things. We just have to work with it and learn. I don't think we've optimized, the best. I mean, the thing is, as most people will say, and I still have the training wheels on my bike, okay? I still listen to HemiSync. I'm not yet at a point where I can just walk down the street and immediately, the number 21 pops in my head and I'm at Focus 21 and I'm processing everything there completely out of space and time. I got to keep working on it. But I think this is all about, these are tools to kind of help people get to these conscious levels and do amazing things. I mean, this is the kind of thing that can change the world. But it's, I think that we can probably still do more work towards understanding how these things work. I mean, even the HemiSync that's been around a long time, I was a little surprised to find out after I did my gateway that they weren't doing ongoing research every day to, better and better HemiSync, better and better conscious level exploration. I was a little surprised at that. But I think, no question it works extremely well, but that doesn't mean we can't learn more about how to kind of get it out there to the world, because I really look at these techniques as being kind of industrial strength capabilities of helping people all around this world from all kinds of backgrounds to get into deep conscious states and to help to fuel this global conscious awakening. And again, I think there's plenty of reason to think that getting up into gamma frequencies and using SAM and possibly using them in combination is going to offer incredible tools. But as I was saying, I think other focus levels, and potentially other auditory techniques. We haven't, certainly haven't investigated everything possible. I still think the HemiSync is, to me, with my kind of naive understanding, it is an absolutely astonishing thing that I think undoes 500 million years of evolution that had to do with the biophysics of the brain and having to move things out and compartmentalize various functions because of limitations of neuronal populations. And that basically Bob Monroe kind of flipped that switch back and put the whole brain into a mode it had not been in since vertebrates first emerged. But there's other work to be done, I think, to understand this better. Certainly, a lot of what we do is way beyond the brain science. I spent 25 years studying all the brain science, but I know that the answers to most of these questions go far beyond anything we can ever do with a functional MRI scan or EEGs or spectral EEG or what have you, because so much of this is outside of the brain and in a whole other realm. And that's where the real focus needs to be, but I still have an interest in looking at whatever we can about the interface, even though I think consciousness makes brain and all of physical reality, so every bit of this is an illusion. We can still pretend until we totally get that understanding the interface might make some sense. And the other thing is I really see, the people here and the Monroe and people of similar interests around the world, that what we're really all about is getting deep into consciousness and exploring consciousness. And there's no question that HemiSync and SAM and auditory techniques are wonderful at doing that, amazingly powerful. But I think it's worth keeping an open mind here that we may be able to supplement, as long as you're talking about kind of manipulations of sensory modalities to initiate deep conscious states, there may be other types of input that can kind of help supplement what we're doing there, especially when you're talking about getting this out to the world and trying to be as robust as possible with all the possibilities. Like I said, this is, in a sense, just talking about HemiSync is kind of talking about the training wheels. And so a lot of what I see kind of in the research environment is going to involve more about program development too, and kind of how you get this out there. In fact, how do you get to, say, an internet presence? I mean, I was in a discussion with somebody today, I was saying that to me it made perfect sense to say that the internet came on the scene here on planet Earth for the sole purpose of helping the Monroe Institute get HemiSync and its modalities out to the world. Because the internet is not some magical endpoint, but it is a stepping stone. I think all this is really going more towards telepathy. And of course, it's not just global telepathy, it's cosmic telepathy. And so I think just kind of being open-minded about this, moving kind of to the next level and the next level, and foreseeing what's going to happen, because I have a strong feeling that things are going to start happening very quickly. It's going to be exponential. The curve's going to go up very dramatically. And the more the Monroe Institute and people like those in this room can get together on how we can best get this out to the world in a very expeditious fashion, in a way that really works to help take people there. And remember, that's why the internet was put there in the first place. Part of what I'm doing with the research here is just kind of helping in my way. I know there are already plenty of wonderful connections, collaborations that have been built through the years with the Monroe. And we can keep fostering that, no question. I think this is certainly not something that that we can do alone, but there's a lot of benefit that can be gained by collaborating with various groups. I'm listening to some of them here. I've already gone up and talked to the people at UVA at DOPS, and we're going to actually go up there and they gave me the typical kind of clinicians, you know, we're too busy for 6 days to do anything. And I said, well, we'll come to you and we'll do a 2-day, you know, facilitator kind of enhanced program, get you going. They already have several people up there who've done Gateways, MC Squared. And I told them, you're not going to just study this, you know, you got to go there. You got to go in there yourself, and that's the best part. So luckily they're excited about that, and we're going to be doing that in early May to get them going. There are other tremendous resources kind of nearby and a few that are a little farther away. And, you know, I don't mean to imply with this list that there's not a lot of incredible stuff going on outside the U.S. And as I was saying earlier today, in fact, I think that is a gold mine, that we have this incredible interest, people from Europe, people from Asia, people from Africa. And in many ways, a lot of those cultures have not gotten quite as far away from the whole kind of divine spark of spirit that the American kind of secularized pseudo-scientific culture has done. So I think there are tremendous benefits to working with people all over the world on this, and I don't mean to imply by this list that, you know, the interesting stuff is in the U.S. This just happens to be what I know about right now, but I also know there are places out there, and I'd love to hear from people, anybody here about you know, kind of building up our collaborations with people all over the world, because I think that's you know, that's what it's all about. And there are a lot of similar interests, and I think there's just a huge benefit that we at the Monroe, that we really are not overcome with dogma and a dogmatic approach. Just to kind of move this along in the interest of getting right to some conversation, I think that verification of some of these phenomena certainly has a place. No question, it's been well verified by you know, Skip and Joe and people who've worked in this stuff for years. But I think working with a group like DOPS will be useful to help kind of get us to a point where maybe we're getting a little better notion of mechanisms and possibly of ways to enhance some of these effects for people who aren't as naturally prone to getting in there. So that's one of the things that I think we can do. And I just put in here, I mean, there are other things kind of outside of the typical Monroe realm, but I think that involve like dreams and lucid dreaming that are obviously of interest, because they're kind of right there in the same ballpark. And then just to kind of summarize, a lot of this, as I see us moving forward and trying to optimize these techniques, a lot of this is a mission for humanity. So much of it has to do with healing self, healing others, all kind of acting as a channel of that unconditional infinite love at the core. And then I think that so much of what I see in people here is really this heartfelt desire to really help people. And there are so many people on this world who really are in need of help. And I think focusing on, you know, what I put here, the least, the last, the lost, intervention in cataclysms. I remember when I was here a year ago for the local chapter network, and we had that beautiful silent march out here by the bonfire through Laurie's labyrinth and then down to the stone, following the earthquake in Japan and tsunami. And I think that kind of thing, and showing that a global conscious awareness and compassion can just amplify the effect of this dramatically. And our ability to kind of build that into our system and do that kind of thing routinely, I think is very important. I put here treating addictions of all kinds, wide open territory where humanity needs a hand, because I can tell you the kind of conventional treatment of today often doesn't work, and addictions of all manner, not just to drugs and alcohol, but take just a tremendous toll. And that's a place where I think we can add tremendous value with HemiSync and with kind of the spiritual gift that it brings. I put in here prisons, poverty, hopelessness. I mean, everybody in this room knows kind of where this might go. But remembering, especially those people most in need, I think will, because we're really just using that energy of love, of unconditional love, from the source, bringing it to all these kinds of people. I think will do just an absolute world of good and help in changing this world. And then, of course, there's, as I say here, mission for spirit, and this really has to do with those who are making the transition, to help patients, so they help people in general to overcome that fear of dying, to help them realize that this spark, the divine spark, whoa, that was me. Oh, sorry. Okay, well, good. But to help them realize what we know about the eternity of that soul, and that these are just costumes. And when this act is over, we leave this costume behind. And I think that helping people deal with that, helping bereaved parents, bereaved children, and of course souls in limbo, which we have all done in kind of lifelines and Focus 21 to 27, and we can certainly talk about that too. My personal interest here is to really wake up the medical community, starting with all my kind of neuroscientific buddies, because it's really a logical thing. I mean, the hard problem of consciousness and the smoking gun of the enigma of quantum mechanics together. Give me 5 minutes with anybody in neuroscience, and I guarantee you I can probably get them to at least consider this is probably the most likely way to explain the relationship between spirit, soul, mind, body and brain, is that the brain is not primary. And I think by waking up the medical community, and a lot of them are already on board. I mean, many of them are, but there's plenty of room to move that along. And I think what that'll do is then open the floodgates, because there are hundreds of millions of patients and family members who have had very direct evidence that their loved one's soul left the body, or they've had communications with the loved one's soul, and they just know it. They don't talk about it unless the environment is right. And I have several people come up to me after every talk I give to kind of the lay audiences. I had never told anybody this, but when Mom died, and then they tell me some story, and there are so many people out there who know it, and I think by letting the medical community kind of come up to speed on this, that'll then open the floodgates for all those other people and get us back on track. And then just one other thing here, mentioning the reincarnation. Luckily, Jim Tucker, who has done a lot of the reincarnation work up at UVA at DOPS, is one of those who's going to be participating in our little course up there in early May. And I think a lot of the kind of research that they've done and the techniques in reincarnation and past life studies will be helpful in kind of validating and getting more evidence to show that what we're doing, what we're encountering there, is valid and is meaningful. And in my view, what a lot of this involves in terms of talking about research and where we're going and how we want to reshape this organization has to do with kind of this blue sky thinking, and basically we're just talking about helping this whole world get beyond the physical limitations of the human brain and mind. That, as I said, I think the internet is not the grand final invention of the human intellect, but in fact it's a stepping stone towards telepathy. And of course that is something that is available. We all know that our minds are capable of doing exactly that. And again, it's not just humans. I mean, this is all about consciousness that extends to all life, and it's certainly not limited to planet Earth. Exploration throughout time and space, higher dimensional. This is all something that I think 100 years from now, of course 100 years from now is the same as it was 1,000,000 years ago, but that these are all things that will have happened. this will be the world that people live in, because it'll be completely changed, because the whole world will know that this is real. And that is something that people in this room and people at collaborating institutions, we're all going in this direction. And I do believe that it's coming on us quite rapidly. This ability to peer behind the veil. This little woodcut seems to make its way into many talks around here. I kind of love it. That's kind of what I feel like I do sometimes when I cross that bridge at Focus 21, get to the other side. So, trying to put it all in a nutshell. Let me see what's coming up next. Yes. That I think that really this community is the tip of the spear in many ways. Although again, those other collaborative institutions are all on very much the same page. But I think the good news about the Monroe is it really has the potential to give the tools and techniques out to the world to help everybody get on board with this, for exploring the profound nature of consciousness, and to help get us, help humanity come up out of the chrysalis. So, given that I really don't want to spend too much more time on all this, the Buddha enlightenment, because this came up today during lunch, about, what is this all about? And this is about the student asking the Buddha, then are you a teacher? No, I'm not a teacher. And then what are you? Asks the student, exasperated. And of course the answer is that he is awake. And that's all we're trying to do, is to get the whole planet to that point of being awake. And on that little note, I think I'm getting to my finale here.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
Of course, that's how Hollywood sees it. But I would say that the reality is far more powerful than that. So I think we should follow up on Robert Monroe's suggestion and get it out there. Thank you very much.